The morning Diana fired me, she dismissed my work as a useless dream built in an empty garage. To her, my engine project was just clutter wasting storage space. Just 3 juniors wasting weekends and an unapproved draining budget line. She signed my firing papers without even looking up. I packed my tools silently, left my badge behind, and walked out holding a single box of paper nobody else saw any value in. 18 months later, that exact same engine, the one she threw out, was roaring under the hood of the fastest machine ever to cross a finish line. Nobody was calling my work junk anymore. Stick with me today. What I built in secret will change how you view ideas dismissed by the experts. At 6:30 on a Monday morning, I was standing alone inside the main Apex Motorsport Group garage. The entire corporate building around me was still pitch black. Fluorescent lights cast a pale, cold glow over the metal surface of my workbench. My coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and I had not even noticed. I was studying a technical drawing the way most people read a classic novel, slowly, deliberately, checking every detail, knowing there was a hidden masterpiece waiting to be built. I had been quietly doing this for 9 solid years, since long before Apex ever put its name on a racing program. Before Diana Voss, before the arrogant board, and long before quarterly metrics were stamped with my initials. I was there when the company was nothing but a few hopeful investors, and very little else. And I stuck it out through every single racing season that followed. Not because the corporate executives asked me to stay, but because the work itself gave me a reason to arrive before anyone else. My workspace told a clear story to anyone who actually bothered to look closely. The top drawer held wrenches lined up perfectly from smallest to largest. The second drawer held precision tools, each sitting in a custom cutout made just for it. Inside my personal locker, there was no family photo or shiny racing trophy to be seen. Instead, it was a hand-drawn blueprint on a yellowed sheet of paper that looked like old newspaper. I drew it at 22, sitting in a cheap rented room with only a lamp and a pencil. Solving a complex design problem I did not have the money or parts to build yet. I kept that paper for 16 years, and not out of some foolish sentiment, but because the core engineering truth behind it was absolutely correct. I was just waiting for the right moment to finally prove its worth. You and I know Apex lived in a frustrating middle ground of racing back then. 3 full seasons went by without a championship trophy, but also without a major crash. In our world, that merely meant surviving rather than achieving any real racing success. The arrogant board of directors did not see our survival as a win. They wanted a championship, and 3 seasons of average performance had completely drained their patience. The corporate executives decided that we did not need real engineering breakthrough or a long runway for development. They claimed we needed new leadership. They wanted an executive who read a spreadsheet the way I studied engineering plans. Someone who would ruthlessly label our best ideas as waste and cut them out. They found that cost cutter in Diana Voss, hired from outside the racing world. I knew nothing of these corporate decisions when the blow landed. The news dropped that Thursday. You and I both know what happened next. I glanced at the corporate memo, saw her name, and went back to my real work. Executive shakeups meant absolutely nothing to me. All that mattered was perfecting our fuel injection timing sequence, and how our custom alloy block handled extreme heat under sustained, high-load racing conditions. I was secretly reviving a dismissed dead powertrain project off the clock for 2 long years. That scrap heap engine was my absolute obsession. It was all I saw at my bench hours before the suits came to declare it junk. It occupied my mind on those late empty highway drives when I had nothing to do but dream of its potential. Do but calculate those massive horsepower numbers over and over again. Diana Voss took charge on Tuesday. By Friday, our shop floor turned cold and corporate, hard to put into words but impossible to ignore. Within just 72 hours of her arrival, every classic diagnostic tool in our garage was replaced by a soul-crushing software platform that gave me a barcode and demanded financial projections for a project they deemed useless. Strict weekly status reports started. Any R&D expense I could not connect directly to an official project. Code was immediately flagged by the software and sent straight to her desk. Her restructuring was not openly hostile. It was thorough, like a sterile audit. Not cruel, just completely indifferent to the raw engineering soul she was suffocating. Her background was sterile aerospace, not dirty racetracks. That bias made her dismiss our finest work as worthless garbage. She spent 20 long years in cleanrooms where a tiny, unmapped detail was considered a fatal threat. To her, raw mechanical instinct was a wasteful luxury, a hobby for amateurs, not real corporate professionals. Every single decision of her career was dictated entirely by telemetry data, confirmed by spreadsheets and validated by cold metrics afterward. When she walked into Apex Racing and saw the massive gulf between our corporate goals and real track results, she assumed she knew the answer. She blamed our gut instincts and years of hands-on mechanical wisdom, calling our creative breakthroughs mere waste. She was here to wipe us out, never imagining a discarded idea could outperform her metrics. She clocked me during her first week, not with hostility, but with that cold, scanning glare she reserved for mechanics who quietly stayed out of her sight. To her, I was just a quiet mechanic who didn't disrupt her precious administrative workflow. I caused zero trouble and turned in my paperwork on schedule. And I kept my mouth shut during her corporate planning meetings. She assumed I was far too simple to ever be able to pitch my rogue engine designs to a boardroom of wealthy investors. I would never make a shiny slideshow or translate my mechanical breakthroughs into the corporate buzzwords she used to measure value. In her rigid, analytical mind, these traits, relying on unproven instinct and refusing to play her games, proved that my secret, unapproved project was nothing but a useless waste of company time. Her very first board meeting tore through our workshop budget in painful line-by-line detail. Then she reached the budget line for internal research and development. She paused at an unauthorized project I had been quietly funding for almost 2 years without her precious barcode. No milestone updates, no corporate reports, just what she saw as complete unapproved waste. She raised her eyes from my folder and asked the silent room a single, cold question. What measurable value does this waste of a project bring? The room went dead silent. I was locked out of that room. The executives never invited me to speak. The revolutionary engine I was bleeding over did not even have an official name in the company registry. To them, it was just junk. Inside my private notebooks, hidden under frantic equations and messy math, I secretly named this worthless scrap project Wraith. The name just came to me out of nowhere. It was a word that perfectly captured my obsession one late night while trying to define the unseen magic I wanted to breathe into this dismissed machine. An engine slipping effortlessly through friction rather than fighting it. A motor finding pure speed by needing less from the physics around it. Let me tell you, the breakthrough struck me 2 years ago at a Nevada race. I stood by the pit lane on a scorching day, waves of heat rising off the dark asphalt. I watched the leading car lose. Not from bald tires, drag, or some broken useless part, but because the engine block itself was choked, fighting its own power at top speed. Every high-end racing motor in the entire industry suffered from this massive ignored flaw, yet the self-proclaimed experts dismissed it as hard, unchangeable physics. An invisible ceiling built into standard combustion dynamics at high speeds. Huge corporate brands wasted millions trying to force more raw power into that flawed cycle. None of them asked if the violent internal friction could be completely erased using a radical unproven design they would call waste. I became obsessed with solving that exact puzzle ever since that Nevada race. You and I know brilliant ideas sound like madness initially, and my solution was completely crazy. I had to throw away parts of the block rather than adding more weight, redirecting the raw flow of energy inside the machine in a way that standard engine design actively rejected. 2 young mechanics helped me at the start. Both were highly motivated initially. But the first kid quit. After 3 months, filing a silent request to work on something proven. The second guy hung on for 6 months before pleading for a transfer, never actually admitting to my face that he thought my design was a total waste. Honestly, I never blamed them for walking away. My revolutionary invention was still a theory, and ordinary minds need visible proof before they see value. So I kept working alone. By the time corporate management arrived, my hidden prototype was there, barely holding together. Far too delicate for a track test, supported only by a mountain of messy notes, secret dyno data, and that crumpled stained paper showing the original Nevada sketch I kept close. I knew I only needed 4 months and a tiny fraction of the cash they throw away on minor repairs to finally prove my silent engine on a real high-speed test track. That budget was pocket change by elite racing standards. But my unproven project was not on their approved spreadsheets. And we all know corporate minds dismiss genius as waste if it does not show immediate profit. One quiet afternoon, a young rookie named Grace Whitfield walked into my bay. She was the only person in the entire building who saw potential in my worthless engine. Grace once asked me a question that lingered far longer than most. She wondered why I never begged the executives for a formal presentation. I stayed dead silent for a long moment before answering her. My answer was simple: true breakthroughs are proven on the track, not in meetings. She quickly jotted that down in the small notebook inside her jacket pocket. She probably could not explain why those words felt important enough to write down. The corporate pushback came in slow stages. Big disasters always start with quiet warnings. They build with tiny pressures until a critical point finally snaps. The first strike came fast. A cold budget audit email Diana sent 3 weeks after taking charge. It flagged my prototype parts as waste, citing zero official approval and no paperwork. The actual cost was tiny, but the missing paperwork made them panic. I saw her email at 7 in the morning and replied instantly. Just 4 tight lines of pure engineering truth written in my shorthand. Sharp technical language I always use when thinking on my feet. The boss read it twice. She knew the words but missed the genius. She forwarded it straight to her operations director with a brief note attached. Book a meeting. The entire thing lasted exactly 22 minutes. Diana sat opposite me, budget report in hand, demanding I explain my supposedly useless engine so a clueless investor could understand it. I honestly tried, sketching a clear diagram on my notepad. I broke a revolutionary combustion cycle down into the simplest possible concepts. She stared at that complex engine sketch for a long moment. Then came the only corporate question she cared about. When could we actually test this machine on the track? I told her 4 months, assuming I kept workshop access and my current building materials. She snapped that 4 months was useless for this racing season. She claimed the company could not waste resources on unproven development, especially on a timeline that gave them zero data before their big sponsor review. I did not argue. We ended without an agreement, which was an answer in itself. 2 weeks later, a hostile warning letter arrived from the Human Resources Office. I was not fired yet, just warned for wasting company time on unapproved parts. I signed their ridiculous little form and handed it right back. But I never cut back on the late nights spent building that engine. I absolutely refused to slow down. I knew the truth. Once this engine broke records, its worth would speak for itself. And if the track times failed, no amount of corporate paperwork could ever save me. 6 weeks into Diana's run, she called a full engineering meeting to reveal her plans. Every boring, safe project was listed. Every mechanic's daily task was fully mapped out. Every slow, safe priority was ranked. My breakthrough project was completely erased from their official files as waste. I sat quietly in the back of the conference room and kept my mouth shut. Grace sat 2 chairs away, watching me closely, waiting for an explosion that never came. When the meeting finally ended, I calmly picked up my old notebook. I gave a sharp nod to no one and walked right out the door. That night, I locked myself inside the hidden workshop until 2 in the morning, quietly testing baseline measurements to finally prove my impossible prototype's worth. That supposedly dead engine was actually running better than ever. He logged those impossible performance numbers, shut off the workshop lights, and quietly slipped out. Think about it. The day they fired him started like any other. He walked in at 6:45, grabbed some cheap coffee, opened his laptop, and stared at the incredible engine data from the night before. The performance numbers staring back were absolute gold. He was halfway through his notes when the phone rang at 9:15. It was Human Resources calling him upstairs. The voice was flat and corporate. That rehearsed tone Human Resources uses right before they drop an axe they have already dropped 100 times. She demanded he come upstairs immediately, and he promised to be there in 5 minutes. The CEO, Diana, was already waiting when he arrived. She sat beside the Human Resources rep with a thick folder open on the table. She did not even bother to look up at him. When she finally did, her face was ice. It was typical corporate arrogance. The decision was made, and debate was out of the question. She coldly announced his employment was terminated, effective immediately. Her excuse was his use of unapproved company resources. She claimed he ignored their so-called strategic corporate priorities. She criticized his lack of measurable deliverables on the engine project. A project they thought had just wasted company resources for 2 years. The funny thing is, she was technically right about those facts. But she had no idea those facts were about to rewrite racing history. Not yet. There was nothing he could say to those suits to change their minds. He read the termination paperwork like a complex schematic, slowly, thoroughly, taking his time. Absolutely nothing in those pages came as a surprise. He signed his name and slid the paper back. Diana had to get one last word in before he stood up. She claimed she respected his work ethic, but his custom build just did not fit their rigid corporate structure. He stared right at her, holding her gaze for a quiet second before giving a single nod and walking out. He walked back to his workbench completely alone. By mid-morning, the workshop floor was buzzing with activity. Mechanics dodged between testing bays while a few shot sideways glances as he grabbed an empty box from above his locker. He began packing his station, carefully loading up the precision tools he actually owned. His custom tuning manuals and all those secret notes from late-night testing. Just as he taped the box shut, Grace stepped out at the far end of the hallway. She started to say something, but ultimately chose to stay quiet. He kept walking, gently patting her shoulder for a brief second, without breaking his stride. He pushed straight through the heavy glass main exit. He placed his security badge flat on the reception desk without tossing or slamming it. Leaving it right there, he carried his box of tools out into the parking lot. You know that heavy silence. He just sat in his car, his own engine completely dead. Through the windshield, the massive corporate headquarters reflected the harsh late-morning sun off its glass windows. Glaring light slid across that giant, unfeeling corporate facade in slow, lazy sheets. He was not wasting thoughts on the CEO, nor was he grieving his 9 years of work. Instead, he was running a horsepower figure in his mind, a secret number that whispered a truth nobody else was ready to believe. He started his car and drove away from the corporate lot without looking back once. 9 days later, Owen Marsh finally called him up. He had not reached out to a single soul during those first 10 silent days. I let my professional profile gather dust. I completely ignored the recruitment spam from 2 massive corporate firms sitting in my inbox. I actually slept, truly slept, for the first time in longer than I could remember. 8 straight hours of rest for 2 nights. Honestly, it felt so foreign it was disorienting. Owen kept his call short. My friend had an empty garage bay just collecting dust, and he told me to take it. He said I did not need to explain anything or give him a strict schedule. Then he asked if I wanted lunch. I gladly accepted both of his generous offers. The shop sat on the eastern edge of town, tucked inside a gritty industrial strip built decades ago. Over time, it became a messy patchwork of small businesses, like a printing shop. There was a storage lot, 2 run-down auto bays, and Owen's shop at the end. Owen Marsh ran a quiet one-man shop fixing local cars, sometimes even motorcycles. And whatever junk people dragged in, knowing he would always find a way to fix it. He had zero corporate backing, no glossy brand strategy, and absolutely no desire to scale up his business. Yet the concrete floor of his main bay was clean, level, and completely open for me. He gave me that quiet back corner and asked for nothing at all in return. I hauled my entire setup in one single trip. Just a beat-up workbench from my first apartment and a basic rolling light stand, along with 3 heavy boxes of parts I bought before the corporate suits called my work garbage. I set up my makeshift lab that very afternoon. I called up 2 trusted suppliers who knew my engineering work, quietly ordering parts for my hidden project. I wiped out my life savings to pay them and started over from scratch. Not by building a physical prototype, since I lacked the massive corporate budget to build that from scratch. No, I went back to the raw physics of my idea. Stick with me here. I double-checked every note, testing their expert assumptions against my raw math, searching for the single point where my engine theory would break down under pressure. I found absolutely no failure point. What I discovered instead, during 3 grueling months hidden in that dusty corner, was a brutal design evolution. a tighter, bulletproof version of my original concept. A brilliant fix for the timing issue that made my early prototype stutter under massive torque loads. Not just masking the issue, but redesigning how the parts were interacted to completely eliminate the flaw. My original schematic paper sat on the edge of the bench, weighted down by a heavy wrench. Believe me, it was not some useless souvenir. It was undeniable proof of the exact moment I saw the system design function. Looking at those plans kept me entirely focused on the breakthrough machine I was quietly building. Instead of letting daily setbacks dictate my path like those corporate experts wanted, Owen simply brought me fresh coffee every morning, staying completely out of my way. We had been friends so long that our comfortable silence required absolutely zero effort, and he understood without me ever having to say it. The massive questions he had were things I just was not ready to answer yet. Then, near the end of the third month, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, while the sky turned a flat, dull gray, I suddenly froze right in the middle of my work. I stared at the data on my page, crossed out one major bottleneck value, and rewrote the equation. The rejected engine actually worked. I did not move for a long time. I dropped my pencil, staring at the cold metal ceiling. You know that feeling when the so-called experts call you crazy? There lay my dismissed, hidden prototype, catching the pale autumn light. Owen strolled past holding a wrench. He cast a quick, pitying look inside my workspace and kept walking. He figured my obsession was a dead end anyway, so why bother interrupting? 4 months after the corporate bosses trashed my career, Grace texted me out of the blue. She bypassed the official corporate channels, reaching out directly to my personal number instead. A relic from our days working side by side on a very different powertrain build. Her message was short, just 6 words: "Can we meet? I have something." Within minutes, I shot back a reply to lock down a time and place. We chose a gritty diner by the highway, a plain, functional spot that suited our serious mood. Grace walked inside carrying a worn computer bag. Ordering nothing, she just sat there and stared at me. It was that classic look people give when they are quietly trying to figure out if your obsession finally broke you. Then she reached inside her bag and slid a USB drive across the table. She whispered exactly what was on it. Real performance logs from my final prototype runs at the firm, right before they called my work garbage. She stole those files right after they fired me, gambling on her belief that my technology actually worked. Even though she did not fully understand my blueprints yet. She promised she had kept this stolen data a secret and would never tell our former bosses. I plugged the drive in right there, pulling up the raw telemetry files in tense silence. I started scanning the diagnostics step by step, searching for proof of my design, carefully tracking the graphs and columns. While Grace quietly sipped her coffee, I suddenly froze 7 minutes in. Pay close attention here. I noticed an odd spike in the performance metrics, then jumped back to check my old baseline. Then I pushed the screen toward her and explained that my dismissed engine did something incredible. It was a breakthrough I had completely missed during live testing. The logs proved it all. My rejected concept was actually flawless. I finally knew the exact tweak needed to stabilize the motor. That was when Elijah Monroe entered the picture. Grace mentioned him that night in my workshop, right after we spent 3 hours mapping out what this breakthrough meant for racing. She knew a professional racer who flew completely under the radar. Yet top motorsport mechanics deeply respected him for his unmatched, precise vehicle feedback. He was currently a free agent. He wanted to drive for an independent startup, but only if the tech was truly revolutionary. She vouched for his silence, so I agreed to meet him just once. Elijah arrived at my dusty workshop early Saturday morning. He was incredibly focused, quiet, calculated, and never wasting a single word in conversation. He walked around my cluttered workbench without touching any tools. He simply stared at the unfinished engine setup I was building. Then he asked a question that stunned me with its sheer brilliance. He didn't ask about top speed or how much raw horsepower my block produced. Instead, he asked how the chassis would handle at high speeds compared to traditional setups. I gave him truth. I explained that internal friction would practically disappear at high speeds. That meant radical handling dynamics, exactly what the corporate suits dismissed as useless and erratic. I promised him our rejected design would feel impossibly smooth instead. The corporate drivers found our breakthrough disorienting. They only knew how to measure power by engine strain. Elijah just listened to my supposedly crazy pitch. When I finished, he smiled. I want to try it. That was our whole rebellion, just me, Grace, and Elijah. We sat around Owen's dirty garage bench that Sunday evening, eyeing a regional desert test just 4 months away on the calendar. An open-class test day out in the dusty desert. A brutal Southwest track built for rogue designers like me, requiring zero corporate money to run. Elijah had actually run that circuit before under a private name. The sign-up forms asked zero questions about corporate sponsors or teams. We had zero funding, no official backing, and absolutely no room for mistakes. Owen leaned against the door, listening to my supposedly impossible plan for 10 minutes before quietly slipping away. When I went outside to find him, Owen was busy locking down the main shop bay. He asked me flat out if I had the cash to build this dismissed design. I went quiet for a second, then admitted, not even close. Owen just nodded. He offered me whatever money he could spare without ruining his own small shop. Then he killed the front bay lights and simply told me, good night. Resurrecting that dead engine took 11 weeks. Grace smuggled components from the inside, routing packages to our dirty garage while still working her day job at Apex. Keeping a rigid wall around her official day job and the secret engine rebellion we ran every single weekend. I worked 7 days a week, not from panic, but out of a cold rage burning since the morning they threw my career in the trash, calling my life's work a waste of time. The massive defect I found buried in their fancy telemetry data. The terrible lag in their pressure valve at top speed. My fix meant completely throwing out their flawed component, instead of just slapping a band-aid on the symptoms like those arrogant corporate experts did. I rebuilt the entire system from the ground up. It was far simpler than their bloated mess, proving my concept was superior. I set up our first secret run at a private track far from our garage. Just a straight dirt strip owned by a veteran mechanic who rented it out totally off the grid. Elijah arrived at 7 in the morning. Crisp morning light hit the flat, silent desert dirt. There wasn't a single breath of wind. I had been waiting since 5:30. Obsessively tuning my reborn engine, pouring all my spite into the tiny details those corporate experts called useless. When Elijah strapped into the driver's seat, I gave him one strict rule. Do not push into the high RPMs on these first 2 passes. Let my engine find its rhythm before you start begging it for pure speed. Elijah rolled back after 2 passes, swearing the mid-range power felt unlike any engine he'd ever raced. At lower and medium speeds, our dismissed machine practically talked to him. Dead quiet mechanically, but incredibly sharp and direct with every bit of feedback. Then he admitted that when he finally pushed past the threshold on run 2, something suddenly felt slightly off. He felt a tiny lag in the raw power, barely the length of a breath. A small ghost in our machine that vanished once he dropped below peak speed. He gave me the honest truth, just data, no complaints. I plugged my laptop into the port, hunting through the raw telemetry in the desert wind while Elijah watched me work. After 12 minutes, I looked up. The engine isn't garbage. It is only the compensation valve. It is lagging 12 milliseconds behind my model at top velocity. Fixing this was never about just adjusting that valve. I had to completely rewrite the compensation system's timing logic. That ensures the valve is never forced to respond when pure physics makes lag inevitable. I told them I would finish this dead design in 3 weeks. Elijah just nodded. I will be here when you are ready. What you and I did not realize was that an independent observer from a major engineering magazine was secretly watching us. He heard whispers from an inside source. Whispers that my supposedly dead engine worked, and he wanted to see it. I allowed him to watch without revealing any technical secrets. That night, his notes recorded that he had witnessed an unsponsored, unlabeled project tearing down a private track, generating incredible telemetry data. Data that completely ruined every racing standard he had trusted for 17 straight years. He kept the story hidden, quietly obsessing over the revolutionary data before the season ended. Our proving ground was Silverstone Desert, sitting on a dry lakebed down southwest. A brutal venue built for extreme endurance testing, which eventually became a gritty venue for low-profile, independent racing events. Every October, a mixed race day welcomed rogue builders and their rejected concepts. unapproved garage projects, and wealthy corporate teams sneaking in secret prototypes they wanted to keep hidden away. My old bosses at Apex entered their standard program car. 4 massive corporate racing teams joined them there. Elijah registered our dismissed engine under a simple 2-word name. It sat completely ignored on the entry sheet, attracting zero attention from the experts who assumed we were nothing. I knew those corporate suits were coming. I checked the race roster and instantly spotted Diana's team on it. Her massive corporate team name was impossible to miss on that list. I logged it in my mind as cold, unchangeable data, keeping my mouth shut around Grace and Elijah. There was nothing to say. I was not there to beg Diana for validation. But you see, our dismissed machine needed real asphalt under its tires, and this was our only chance. The night before the race, I worked in a temporary holding bay, a cheap space rented to desperate independents. Just a rusty corrugated metal shack, 1 flickering bulb, and a dirty concrete floor. I swept that floor 3 separate times until the workspace was absolutely spotless. I went over the car with that same obsessive focus I give to dismissed designs that are about to face violent, unpredictable track conditions that nobody can fully control. My fix to the pressure compensation system was locked in, proven across 6 successful runs. Every single run matched my mathematical model. The telemetry said we were ready. And I always trust the data. Grace called at 11 that night. She asked if I needed anything. I told her no. Then, after a heavy silence so long she probably thought the call had dropped, I finally spoke. Remember asking why I never begged corporate for a presentation slot? She whispered yes. I smiled into the darkness. Tomorrow is our presentation. I hung up, picturing her sitting in her quiet car, staring into the dark as she realized our discarded engine was about to change everything. Elijah slipped into my garage at 12:30 a.m. Slipping through the side door I left unlocked for him. He just stood there, staring at my dismissed masterpiece. You know that look, a driver deciding to trust his life to rejected genius. Then he said, I have never raced a machine I did not fully understand. I asked, do you trust it? He replied, I trust you, which is close enough. He laid his hand on the metal, a quiet nod to its hidden worth. Just a moment of respect for my design before he turned in for the night. Sleep was impossible for me. I stood under the lone bulb, staring at the brilliant engine they left for dead. I pulled that old, yellowed blueprint from my inside coat pocket. I had carried it every day since Apex dismissed my ideas. I laid it down. I studied the 22-year-old plans. The pencil lines were smudged and traced over so many times during my exile that half the measurements were unreadable. But the genius of the design remained clear. It always was. I folded the dismissed design and tucked it away safely again. I slid down the cold wall, wrapping my coat tight around myself. The single bulb hummed in the still, freezing desert air. Exhaustion took over and I slept. Suddenly, race morning was here with zero fanfare. The sky turned pale as the massive corporate haulers rolled onto the lakebed. The paddock filled up with the overwhelming roar of massive corporate machinery warming up everywhere. A painful, all too familiar sound. I had lived that world my entire career, but they exiled me 18 long months ago. My custom car sat stripped down while I ran the final connection checks on our setup. Grace arrived at 7:45, watching silently from the shadows. She kept quiet, just observing our final launch prep. She handed me a coffee as I stood up and I gulped it down. The starting grid was lined up by official corporate qualifying times, leaving Elijah dead last in a 14-car field of giants. The self-proclaimed experts completely ignored our rejected project sitting at the very back. Instead, they drooled over the expensive Apex car at the front. It hogged all the attention from scouts looking for conventional designs before the green flag. I spotted Diana Voss in the Apex pit, checking data with the copycat engineer who replaced me. She did not even look our way, they never do. Elijah strapped into our unrecognized masterpiece, finished his launch sequence, and held steady for the green flag. I gripped the pit wall, my headset locked onto his radio channel, clinging to my clipboard. My eyes stayed glued to the live data feeds on my cheap, battered laptop. The pack fought hard through the tight opening corners. They blasted onto the long straightaway where real power is finally put to the test. From 200 meters away, I heard my creation speak. It did not roar like their wasteful setups. It was incredibly quiet. It hummed with balanced perfection, unlike their loud engines screaming under corporate strain. For the first lap, Elijah coasted mid-pack, keeping our genius hidden, feeling the perfect, unmatched balance of a design they called worthless. I watched our dismissed engine start lap 2 without drama. Stay with me, no loud moves gave away its true power yet. This supposed piece of junk was faster exactly where it mattered most. Our rejected engine held peak power, while those expensive corporate motors tore themselves apart. Halfway through lap 3, Elijah had already passed 4 elite corporate cars. The track timing official watching Sector 3 stared at our dismissed car number and double-took before logging the unbelievable data. Lap 5, Elijah blasted past the timing beam on the main straightaway, recording a lap time this entire racing circuit had never witnessed in its history. Not just some minor tweak, a record-breaking pace so impossibly fast that corporate experts would have dismissed it as a glitch if it only happened once. But it happened twice, then a third time on lap 6, going even faster. The timing officials scrambled in panic. Sector records across 3 different parts of the track had been completely shattered twice in one session by our discarded, impossible build. Picture this: over in the $1 million Apex pit, Diana's lead engineer saw the board, panicked, and ran. 3 minutes later, he sprinted back and handed Diana a paper printout. She just stood there, reading. She stared toward the track as the cars began their second-to-last lap, searching for our once-dismissed entry number among the fleet of elite machines screaming down the main straightaway. She snapped at her engineer, demanding to know who built that machine. Checking his sheet, he replied it was a rogue independent build. Only one engineer listed, me. She demanded the name, and when he said it was mine, she went completely, utterly silent. She just gripped that paper, staring out at the track for a long, quiet moment. Elijah finally brought our vindicated machine down pit lane right at the end of the session, rolling to a quiet stop right in my bay. Climbing out, he pulled off his helmet and looked straight across the roof at me. Neither of us uttered a single word at first. The paddock roared around us, engines ticking, corporate teams dragging gear, and mechanics yelling across the space. Grace stood right behind me, both hands pressed flat and tight against her chest. Her eyes were shining bright, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the thick track dust we had just kicked up. Finally, Elijah just gave me one quiet, knowing nod. I nodded back. Our discarded dream had just proven its undeniable worth. 40 minutes later, Diana Voss herself marched straight to my modest little bay. She came entirely alone, no lead engineer, no operations director, nobody from her elite squad. Still walking with that arrogant, deliberate strut she used to dominate any room she entered. When she arrived, I was just replacing a side panel, wrenching the bottom bracket. I heard her approach, knew exactly who it was, and just kept on working. She stood there, waiting until I finished securing the bracket before uttering a word. There was no apology. She just asked a direct technical question. No excuses, just a raw, desperate technical question. She wanted to know what specific design choice made my once-dismissed engine so powerful. That gave us an advantage at maximum track speed. Honestly, her question proved our worth. We all know that look. That single question told me she finally understood the timing sheets, desperately scrambling to grasp the hidden genius she had once dismissed as trash. I laid my tool on the concrete and explained the breakthrough she once called worthless. The exact pressure compensation principle she once dismissed as a waste of time, and how that supposedly dead engine design completely transformed energy dynamics at sustained high speeds. I spoke to her with the same serious technical language I would use with any seasoned engineer. She followed every word. When I finished, she was dead quiet for a long moment. Then she finally muttered, "I was wrong." She did not even try to expand on it. No excuses, no boardroom context to justify why she had branded my concept a failure. No corporate logic to excuse firing me or calling my breakthrough a waste of company time. She admitted defeat in the plainest way possible, and hearing that, I looked her dead in the eye today. I just nodded once. The proof of my work was absolute, requiring nothing more from either of us. I did not bother telling her how blind she had been. I did not list what I lost over those brutal 18 months, starting from the day she labeled my engine useless and fired me, leading up to the moment I stood victorious in this paddock. But you and I are not here for petty corporate accounting. My next move was dead straightforward. I told her my breakthrough engine technology was officially up for licensing, but it would demand a fully equipped, world-class research laboratory and a developmental timeline measured in full racing seasons, not short-sighted financial quarters. I also demanded a highly competitive engineering contract for my ally, Elijah Monroe, plus a major promotion for Grace Whitfield, who backed my discarded project when no one else would. Diana stared at me quietly through all of this. She quietly admitted she would need to review my technical records. I told her I preserved everything from that original, dismissed development phase, along with the massive data proving the worth of this winning build. She could access it tonight if she wanted. My friend Owen had actually driven out to the racing circuit that day entirely unprompted. He rolled up early in his old truck, parking way out in the cheap public lot. He sat in a folding chair near the vehicle gate, cradling a beat-up thermos of hot coffee, quietly watching our record-breaking second session prove everyone wrong from a distance. Reading those blistering, undeniable numbers on the timing display across the paddock. When I finally came out to find him after my talk with Diana ended, Owen was still sitting there, his old thermos balanced casually on his knee. He asked if my victory was complete. I said the first part was. Owen finished his coffee, screwed the heavy cap back on his thermos and stood up. He just nodded, then I can head back. He walked to his truck, climbed in and drove out of the lot without any ceremony, the way he handled everything. I stood beside my proven masterpiece in the bay as the afternoon faded. Golden light stretched long and amber across the dry lake bed outside our open doors. The circuit was dead quiet, sessions completed, rival teams packing up their expensive, losing setups. The roar of engines faded into that heavy silence unique to a desert track at the end of a long day. I reached deep into my pocket and pulled out that yellowed design paper for the very last time. I stared at the blueprint in the fading desert light. That 22-year-old drawing with its smudged notations, containing the very engine principle she had called trash. I slowly folded it along those familiar worn creases just as carefully as always. But this time I tucked away a proven masterpiece. He tucked the timeslip right next to the blueprints the board had discarded as garbage. No more hiding. He filed it alongside the telemetry logs, absolute proof that this supposedly dead engine could shatter every limit they called impossible. No one could call his theories crazy anymore. The proof was right there, a world record. On the asphalt, the discarded machine did the talking. No corporate excuses. The dyno numbers never lied. The masterpiece just needed the right track to finally scream past their ignorance.